A great way to introduce some chaos. A screaming pile of flesh rolls over you to bite you with a dozen mouths. It's not so easy to be brought back to life. If it reduces you to 0 hit points, you die. That's not a crime, and I'm not sorry. I don't know what it says about me that those are some of my favorite D&D monsters, and I'm not going to think about it. Hello and welcome to the Chemist's Codex. My name is Peter, and I like to tell stories about whatever happens to catch my interest, because I believe those stories can teach us more about ourselves. Although today the story is more so about me, because I'm going through my favorite monsters from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. It's a bit different from what I normally talk about, but I couldn't think of anything better for this week, so let's go. I've gone through these books and picked out my favorite monsters. I do think there's a decent variety, but there are a couple trends that I've noticed, and I don't really want to talk about it. Although I do want to see if you can pick them out. So without further ado, and in no particular order, I give you my favorite D&D monsters. First up is the Gibbering Mouther. I've been a fan of this thing ever since I started playing D&D, and one thing I'm quite fond of is the fact a Gibbering Mouther is just a pile of flesh covered in mouths and eyes. But the real feature of the Gibbering Mouther comes from how they sound. The creature babbles incoherently at all times. Mechanically speaking, this causes madness in those who hear it. Fail a wisdom save and you lose control of your character. A great way to introduce some chaos. On top of that, the ground around them turns to a strange dough-like consistency. Fail a strength save and you are stuck while this screaming pile of flesh rolls over you to bite you with a dozen mouths. They're a reasonably strong enemy for a lower level party, and they're just kind of gross. What's not to love? Next up is the Space Clown. I'm just gonna let that name sink in for a minute, because what do you mean Space Clown? Well, what I love about these guys is how absolutely nuts their lore is. First, they come from a dimension known as Clown Space, where they started off as normal people who worshipped a god of revelry. However, they became addicted to a substance called Thrill Joy, which is actually distilled from the blood of a demon, and naturally, this turned them all into demons. So now, space clowns roam the cosmos searching for populated worlds where they can set up circuses to lure in people they can feast on. They also have some fun mechanical things as well. They have shoes that squeak when they walk, and when they die, their body pops like a balloon and everything around them gets sprayed with an acidic ichor. We now turn our attention to the Flump. Besides having a fun name, Flumps are one of the few things in the Underdark that isn't trying to kill you. If you're familiar with the Underdark, then you know most everything down there wants to either eat you or enslave you. But not the Flump. They are psychic beings that look like floating jellyfish-esque creatures. They harmlessly feed on ambient psychic energy, and they are also likely to help adventurers in need, which might come in the form of a fresh meal of Underdark mushrooms, or showing you where magical treasure is hidden. Flumps also have a humorous feature called prone deficiency. If a Flump gets knocked prone, there's a chance they land upside down and become incapacitated, similar to a turtle getting stuck on its back. But now for a darker creature, we have the Bone Claw. This is what happens when a wizard tries to become a lich and fails. Instead of becoming a master of death, their soul binds to someone else, someone with a hate-filled heart. Bone Claws serve these masters and revel in causing pain to others. One feature that Bone Claws have that I particularly like is their shadow jump ability. They can use darkness like a short-range teleport, jumping between the shadows on a battlefield. And if they have someone grappled in their giant hands, that person comes with them. And each creature around the Bone Claw when it does this takes 5d12 necrotic damage on a failed saving throw. Plus, if you kill a Bone Claw without killing its master, it doesn't stay gone. It just reforms a few hours later. Moving on to a different type of creature, let's talk about Quicklings, one of my favorite types of fae to use. Quicklings are a type of unseelie fae that are always moving, even while standing still. They vibrate with speed. Their base movement speed is 4 times faster than most player characters. What I like about these guys is using several of them at once. Because of their fast movement, attacks against them are at disadvantage. Combine that with their evasion feature and high dexterity, and Quicklings are surprisingly hard to hit. They make 3 attacks per turn, and while the damage per hit is minimal, with the number of attacks they make and the difficulty of actually hitting them back, a small group of Quicklings can be quite the problem. They're basically the personification of death by 1,000 cuts. Next up isn't really a single monster, but rather a type of monster, the sorrowsworn. These guys are the physical manifestation of negative emotions born from the Shadowfell. There are 5 types of sorrowsworn: the wretched, the lost, the lonely, the hungry, and the angry. I think I like these guys as much as I do because of their strange anatomy. The hungry has a giant mouth, the angry has 2 heads, and the lonely has a harpoon for an arm. They're some of my favorite creatures to throw at my players. Alright, this next one is fun. The Flesh Colossus. basically the giant equivalent of a flesh golem. Only this thing has a breath attack and can swallow creatures whole. If you get eaten, you are restrained inside this mass of flesh while passively taking damage. It's powered by a magical core in its chest. Mechanics-wise, the players can target this core, but if that core gets destroyed, the Colossus doesn't die. It goes berserk instead, melting down and thrashing at whatever is nearby. I also quite like the artwork for the Flesh Colossus. The stitched together, sagging skin, the inexplicable hand pinned to its gut. It's exactly the type of creature I love. Okay, a bit of a different vibe for this next one, the Gothic. These are kind of tragic figures, but incredibly interesting. They're transformed creatures who were once normal people, often wizards or scholars, who were cursed by knowledge that was never meant to be discovered. Now they skulk in ruins, seeking out magical knowledge and secrets. With their giant singular eye, they can look at you and learn your secrets. Just imagine the head games you can play with your players using a Gothic. They might have tragic origins, but they are creepy and dangerous. Alright, time for one of my all-time favorite monsters, the Nightwalker. So in typical Dungeons & Dragons lore, there are two planes of pure energy, the positive plane and the negative plane. The positive plane is associated with life, and the negative plane is associated with death. Now, when someone somehow enters the negative plane, they are replaced with a Nightwalker, and Nightwalkers are the anathema of life. They seek to destroy life wherever it is, and if a Nightwalker kills you, it's not so easy to be brought back to life. The Nightwalker has a feature that if it reduces you to 0 hit points, you die. No death saves, just death. And if that wasn't bad enough, if this happens, only a wish spell can bring you back to life. I think this finality of death is one of the main reasons I like the Nightwalker so much. I try to find a place to put one in every campaign I run, although I've yet to actually kill a player character with a Nightwalker. Maybe someday. Next up is the duelahan, probably more recognizable as the Headless Horseman. I think what I like most about the duelahan here is that it never shows up alone, because the duelahan is the rider, meaning that there is also going to be a mount. My personal choice is to use a nightmare, the flaming hell horse. So already there's inherently 2 creatures to fight. Then the duelahan is also a mythic creature, meaning if it's dropped to 0 hit points, it pops back up for a second phase with access to mythic actions. And in the case of the duelahan, it also summons 3 Death's Heads. So using a duelahan gives you at least 5 creatures to deal with just through the nature of its being. Sticking with some undead, next up is the Revenant. A Revenant forms when a creature dies a cruel and undeserved death, and their soul is too angry to move on. They possess a corpse and hunt down their killer. What I like about Revenants is their core feature. If you kill one, it will come back and will likely hunt you down. This is why I think Revenants can make really good recurring villains in a story. If the players defeat it, then it just comes back later. I don't know if I would use a Revenant as a main villain, but maybe one that works under the BBEG. Or maybe the players just encountered a Revenant by happenstance and now have to deal with it showing up at the worst possible moments. This next one is another one of my all-time favorites, the bodak. Like the Nightwalker, they exist only to cause death, but they take a slightly different approach. The primary way they do this is through their gaze. They have a simple withering gaze attack, but then there's the death gaze. What I love about the death gaze is that if a creature fails the saving throw against it by 5 or more, they drop to 0 hit points immediately. It doesn't matter if you're a barbarian with 200 hit points, if you roll low, you go down. It forces players to avert their gaze, which usually means they have to attack the bodak at disadvantage. It creates a combat that's more interesting than simply hitting each other. And with the death gaze ability, I have actually killed a player character before. Next up is the giant goose. Moving on. Next is the Iron Scale Hydra from the Mythic Odysseys of Theros. Now, I love a Hydra in and of itself, and the Iron Scale Hydra is a slightly tougher version. Although specifically, I'm quite fond of the legendary Iron Scale Hydra, Polukranos. Polukranos is even tougher, requiring even more damage to take off a head. And while a typical Hydra won't regrow heads if it's taken any fire damage that round, Polukranos will only not regrow heads if it's taken at least 40 points of fire damage. I remember once when I used Polukranos in a campaign, the fire damage threshold made it really tough. At one point, I think it had like 15 heads. Yeah, that fight almost ended with a TPK. Okay, I really like this next one, the Boneless. I don't know if there's anything about the Boneless's abilities or lore that I find particularly fun. I think I just like the way the Boneless looks, and its name is accurate for what it is. It's just skin and muscle with no bones. Alright, next up is the Zombie Clot. I don't really know if there's much to say about this one. It's a big conglomeration of zombies in one creature. It's weird, kinda gross, and uses its stench as a weapon, and I don't think there's much else to say. And finally, we have a creature that isn't in any of the books, and that's because it's a creature of my own design. This is the Flesh Hydra. Conceptually, it's just a combination of a flesh golem and a Hydra. I think the real fun comes in how I like to describe it. Patchwork skin of different tones and blood oozing around the stitches holding it together, the skin stretched over pieces of cartilage to form the spines that run along its back. And I think one of my favorite things about the Flesh Hydra is that I made it live in a pool of blood. I originally made it as a final boss to a dungeon, but even so, it's still one of my favorite homebrew creations, and I'm always looking for places where I can use it. So those are my favorite monsters from Dungeons & Dragons. I mentioned up top that there were a couple trends with these monsters. Did you catch them? How about if I put the trends on screen? Do you see them now? Well, first, I tend to like undead things. The bodak, the bone claw, the nightwalker, all undead creatures. Then there are things like the gibbering mouther, the boneless, and the zombie clot. This one is definitely more of an aesthetic trend, but I tend to describe this category as weird amalgamations of flesh. I don't know what it says about me that those are some of my favorite D&D monsters, and I'm not going to think about it. So what if my favorite monsters are weird amalgamations of flesh? That's not a crime, and I'm not sorry. You can pry my piles of flesh from my cold, dead hands. Thanks for watching. So this is different from the videos I normally do, but I really didn't have any better ideas for a video for this week. But why don't you guys tell me about some of your favorite D&D monsters? Or better yet, don't even restrict it to D&D. Tell me about your favorite monsters or enemies from whatever system you want. And if you liked this type of video and want to see more stuff like it, make sure to let me know and subscribe so I can give you the type of content you want to see.